Good afternoon. I'm Jim Townsend, Director of the Levin Center for Oversight and Democracy at Wayne State University Law School. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's panel discussion entitled State Legislative Oversight, the Essential Role of an Effective Legislator. Thank you for joining us. Today's panel kicks off the Levin Center's launch of our brand new State Oversight Academy, or as we affectionately call it, SOA. All week, the State Oversight Academy will be rolling out new tools and programs designed to elevate state legislative oversight. So what is SOA? The State Legislative Academy is the first and only national institute dedicated to promoting effective bipartisan fact-finding and oversight by state legislatures as essential to good governance and democracy. SOA is led, staffed, and supported by the team at the Levin Center and our colleagues here at Wayne Law and Wayne State University's Department of Political Science. Our primary objectives are to first improve the practice of oversight in state legislatures across the country via trainings and events with lawmakers and staff. We also want to foster academic research and scholarship on state legislative oversight. And here we are led by SOA's academic director, Professor Marjorie Townsend of Wayne State's Political Science Department. We will also work to translate scholarship into actionable best practices to be shared among the states. And finally, we want to increase the visibility of oversight as an essential legislative function. So we want lawmakers, staff, and most importantly, the public to see and literally insist that good faith fact-finding and oversight are fundamental responsibilities of the legislative branch of government. So we will build a national community of practitioners, scholars, good government advocates, and the public interested in advancing transparent and accountable government, and also working to mitigate some of the disinformation that can foster extremism and stymie dialogue across the political divide. So you can see now we've got our website up, and you can see some of the things we're going to be doing this week, beginning with today's panel. And as we scroll down, tomorrow we're going to launch our first State Oversight Matters blog. On Wednesday, March 29th, we're going to launch our inaugural FAST class, which is a 15-minute podcast that provides a brief introduction to a new oversight tool or concept or a new topic in oversight. Thursday, March 30th, we will host a second online panel discussion with journalists who will be talking about how state house journalism affects legislative behavior, particularly oversight. And then finally, we'll end the week on March 31st with our first monthly state oversight newsletter. So there will be much more coming in the months and years ahead, but this week we are getting the State Oversight Academy underway. Now, before I turn things over to our moderator, Ben Eikey, I want to say a word or two about Ben. In his capacity as the Levin Center's Manager of State Training and Development, Ben spearheads the Levin Center's state oversight programming. He, along with several colleagues here at the Levin Center, has played a central role in developing and launching the State Oversight Academy. So much thanks goes to Ben and several of us, of our colleagues here at the Levin Center, for some really hard work getting this off the ground. Prior to joining the Levin Center, he was a staff member in the Michigan House of Representatives. He also served as a fellow in Washington, D.C. in the office of Congressman John Molnar. Finally, I want to thank our distinguished panelists for being here today to talk about their approach to public service and lawmaking and the role that state oversight plays in what they do. And Ben, with that, please take it away.
Thank you, Jim. And good afternoon or good morning for our friends on the West Coast. Thank you all for joining us. And welcome, everybody, to the first State Oversight Academy launch panel. Again, I'm Ben Eikey, and while Jim may say I spearhead the State Oversight Academy efforts, I believe I'm merely part of the Levin Center's efforts to build engaging and informative programming on state legislative oversight. Thank you all for joining us today for a bipartisan conversation on the essential role of the legislator in conducting effective oversight. With me for this discussion are two state senators, State Senator Kyra Hoffner is from Delaware and chairs the Legislative Oversight and Sunset Committee. State Senator Ed McBroom is from Michigan and has been a leader in the Michigan Legislature on oversight for many years, previously serving as chair of the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee. Thank you both for being here and for being a part of our State Oversight Academy launch. Senator Hoffner, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Ben. My name is Kyra Hoffner. I am the Senate, Delaware Senate District 14. I cover about 5 different towns. Joining the Delaware General Assembly this year has been extremely exciting, and I'm thrilled to be part of the Oversight Committee. As before I ran for office, that is something I did in my advocacy world and lobbying legislators to make sure our agencies, boards, and commissions were doing the right thing. So I'm happy to be here today and looking forward to a great discussion.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McBroom, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Ben. Good afternoon. My name is Ed McBroom. I'm the senator from Michigan's Upper Peninsula. There's 38 senators in Michigan, and I have almost the entire UP, which is larger than I think 6 or 7 other states. So it's a very big district to cover. I'm about 420 miles away from our state capital and closer to 5 other ones. I'm a dairy farmer, 4th generation dairy farmer. I farm with my wife and my parents. We milk about 125 cows, and my wife and I have 5 children. And I first started serving in the Michigan House of Representatives in 2010. We have very short term limits. So after 6 years in the House, I was out for 2, and then was elected to the Michigan Senate in 2018. I just finished my first term in the Senate and have begun my second and last term now of the Senate. I chaired Oversight Committee in the House and in the Senate, as well as a few other committees and investigations over that time period.
Thank you, Senator. You know, when you your introduction, I'm not sure geographically how many Delawares could fit in the Michigan Upper Peninsula. I'll have to take a look at that. I'll take a look later. Thank you both, though, for being here. And I'll start off with our first question here. I wonder if either of you could talk about what motivated you to first run for office. Was there a specific issue or problem you were concerned about? How does oversight, the power you have as a lawmaker to find facts and get to the bottom of issues, enable you to address those concerns that first spurred you to run for office? Senator Hoffner, do you want to go first?
Sure. So we don't have term limits. And our sitting senator for the 14th district was into his 80s, and he's been part of the legislature for over 40 years. Our demographics of the state of Delaware changed a lot in that time. When he became senator, he represented about 6,000 people. Now we have 49,000 people in the district. He just wasn't getting to everyone. He kept his area close and tight. There were certain issues that he was looking into that weren't a problem for the majority of the public that now live in the area. So I wanted to make sure a voice was being given to everyone in the area, no matter what background they came from or what demographic they associated with. So why not me? Now I am in an area where they never thought a female would become a legislator. No less somebody who is a little bit more on the progressive side, and which I'm not fully progressive, but I am on the a little more progressive side than he is. And just they were not ready for the change, but the voters have spoken and they did vote for me. So I'm taking this extremely seriously. And part of oversight and looking into things is issues that our public have problems with. We have a Department of Labor that hasn't been looked at for over 20 years. Just different organizations that should be and agencies that should be helping the public are not doing that. So I definitely feel like I have the drive and the will to put their feet to the fire.
Okay, well, thank you, Senator. I feel like what I'm hearing is you're saying there were gaps. There were certain areas that needed to get a closer look that perhaps were not according to what you were looking to prioritize. Thank you. Senator McBroom?
Well, I've entertained the notion of getting involved with government dating back to high school, maybe even middle school. Never really was sure how to get there or anything, but thought it would be interesting at some point to do that. After I got out of college with my degree for teaching and was considering farming and teaching at the same time, Michigan Farm Bureau came and asked me to participate in their Young Farmer program, and I represented the whole Upper Peninsula in that endeavor. And that really got me plugged into state level politics and policy making in a way that I had been previously unfamiliar with. My sights had always been more on the congressional side of things. It was through that experience and also through continuing to teach at schools that I became much more aware of how involved in daily life state government actually is. And perhaps for people in the UP in particular, we're a little sheltered from the impacts of the state capitol because we're so far away from it. People tend to forget it's there. But then after I was involved through Farm Bureau, I really started to see actually the state capitol was making a big difference every day in lives. And, we are a natural resource rich area in the Upper Peninsula. People love hunting, forestry, paper products, and mining. And at that time, we had a governor whose administration was extremely antagonistic on all of those things. And you couple it with Michigan being a very highly regulated state, one of the most highly regulated states in the country. And so I really turned my passion for streamlining and having a government that's effective into an effective campaign, and ran on a lot of issues dealing with natural resources, land management, and school curriculum, which we had really made into a straitjacket on a lot of our schools across the state. And so those were the things that were primarily motivating me and why I ran a successful campaign, I think, at the beginning. And eventually that grew into a love for the oversight issues.
Well, thank you, Senator. And I think that both of you really kind of bring a really interesting point. I mean, two very different walks of life, two very different backgrounds, but interested in oversight and interested in trying to find facts and understanding how state government operates, because Senator McBroom, like you talked about, I mean, it has such a traumatic impact on day-to-day life in state, all across every neighborhood, every town. There's a lot of impact and a lot of facts that need to be raised to be able to decide, well, what do we prioritize? And, what could we do to be able to find something and then make it better than we found it? I'm going to go to the next question. How do you decide what your oversight agenda for the legislative session looks like? Where do your investigation topics originate?
Want me to start?
Sure.
All right. All right. Well, so the main function of our committee is to perform periodic legislative oversight and sunset reviews on agencies, commissions, and boards, determine if there is a genuine public need for them, and if so, if the entity is effectively performing and meeting the needs of the public. So our agenda is usually set the prior year.
Oh, wow.
So what we do is we like to pick 6 or 7 entities that are not actually doing anything wrong. It's not a gotcha kind of thing, but they haven't been looked at in over 20 years. So we just want to make sure that they're functioning properly. And we pick 6 or 7 to have like a full review. Like we're digging into them and really finding out. And most of these entities are welcoming and have no problem coming to the table with the information we're seeking. Then we leave a little bit room for, once we start our session, the committee votes on a few entities that still need a full review, but it's something that came up as an issue. So they're usually a little bit more surprised when we come into the legislative session that we're looking to get this information within 6 months. We first do a self-reporting part. Our analyst then interviews them. We collect anything that we need to support what they said and what we're finding. And then they have time to do public comments. They come in for a hearing. They could give us a presentation on what their board, committee, or agency is doing to kind of like let us know where they feel like they have gaps. And then we make recommendations to either help them if they do have a public. Am I telling you too much what we do?
Oh, no, this process is fascinating. I do have a question early on though, because it was talked about the 6 or 7 entities, and you said that they are selected. Who are they? Who chooses?
We do it as a committee. We have, because Delaware is so small, a lot of our things are run on commissions, boards, and agencies. Are you getting a lot of feedback?
A little bit of an echo.
Okay, I'll just lower it. So when we get together, we'll look at an agency that hasn't been looked at in 20 years. So we want to know what they have been doing. Some of them are performing great. Some of them haven't met in 15 years, so they've just been kind of hanging out there, getting state money, but not really doing anything. So those are the entities we'll vote on and just get down to 6 or 7. So the analysts have time to actually work on them for the entire year. We also let the entities bring in public comment. If they have people in the public that they're helping, it's good for those people to come up and give a 2 to 3 minute public comment on why that entity is important to them. So Delaware being so small, we just want to make sure that these agencies are doing what they're supposed to be doing for the public. And it helps when the public steps forward.
Of course. Thank you. Senator McBroom, how do you decide what your oversight agenda for the legislative session looks like? And where do your investigation topics originate?
So Michigan, and some of this is my opinion, but Michigan had so neglected the oversight process by the time I came in and got involved with it. Really since the 90s had let the whole process waste away. The Senate didn't even have an oversight committee anymore until, I started pushing these issues. Term limits are a big reason of that, but also Michigan just has I hate to use the word corrupt for it. It seems a little too strong, but has some significant deficits right now in the legislative side of government and integrity. And so I've been trying to build it from scratch to a large extent. And, I lean very heavily on the Auditor General. We have an award-winning Auditor General's office in Michigan that does outstanding work, but is also somewhat limited in the scope of what they do. And I don't think is nearly as broad as what Senator Hoffner is talking about, or some of my other investigation into how other states do this, particularly Carolina and Idaho, that both do really outstanding work as well. And so, for me, a lot of the ideas of where we're going, how we're going to go about this, come from information I receive either from constituents, problems that I see that are reoccurring, from the Auditor General's audits. We try to take up every audit that's got a material finding and work off of that, but oftentimes those are fairly mundane issues even, it's just like, well, they're not getting everybody to turn in their passwords when they get fired, and they're, too many people have keys, so to get down to the actual heart of overseeing the government where it's failing the people, where it's literally letting them down and letting things like Flint happen, letting a situation around our elections happen that I investigated here and after 2020, dealing with members of the legislature who are misusing their funds. That's been a lot more driven just by my own efforts and my own work. Most recently, I meet with a lot of corrections officials and employees who are really struggling with the management of the Michigan Department of Corrections and the dangerous situation we have there, terrible understaffing. And so, I generate my own investigation out of that. It's not efficient. It's not something that I want to leave it as, because I'm going to term out in 3.5 years at this point, and really want to see something more stable and directive left in place so that the process doesn't falter back to what it was before I got here either.
And we'll make sure to further that conversation with a question coming down the road. Because
Okay.
Everyone would, I'm thinking a little bit about SJRO and some of the efforts from the previous as well, in addition to other approaches you might think about in Michigan and across the country. But from now, Senator Hoffner, the legislative rules in Delaware, they give you as a committee chair the right to subpoena documents and witnesses. And how could you use this power to find facts and improve the quality of your oversight investigations? Are there other ways you can overcome resistance from members of the executive branch who don't want to share information?
Yeah. So, a common misconception about a oversight committee is that we're here just to terminate any entity that is, not meeting the standard of that that year's review. But realistically, we're not here to. We want to help the entities that and our executive branches that are just need a little bit of help. Maybe we need to pass legislation to help them out on any areas that they're lacking in. But yes, we would withhold funds. Our governor also, a lot of our boards and committees are appointed by the governor. Their members are appointed by the governors. And I'm kind of glad you asked this question, because we do have one a board that is being very resistant to everything. Now, we've been trying to interview them for a year. Our analysts have sent them the questionnaire. They didn't answer the questionnaire, maybe put one-word answers. So we finally had the hearing where they're going to come in. They got 20 minutes to do a slideshow and tell us what they do. Delaware is big on transparency, so their minutes are supposed to be published on a website. We couldn't find minutes for 12 years of them meeting. So they come in for an hour. They spoke for an hour, and at the end of the hour, I still don't know what they do. So we decided not to sunset them that night because there was a lot of they were very emotional. So we explained to them that we were going to have discussions, and we had some recommendations about what we were going to do. But there was no recommendation to keep them as a board. They act more of an advocacy group, and they could be absorbed by one of the boards that are already functioning and well suited. So only to open up our email the next day, and they were like, "Oh, great meeting. When are you going to get us more board members? And we need money and administrative help." So that is something we have to cross with them, that the governor is no longer going to appoint board members to them because we just don't know what they do. So they're not going to get any more funding. They're not getting any more board members. And we are going to approach it delicately and let them know that they're no longer a standalone board, but they can continue whatever work they are doing, but under another entity.
Makes sense. I mean, hey, I have another question for you. You chair a joint committee on the Joint Legislative Oversight and Sunset Committee. How does oversight differ when performed by a joint committee? What were the benefits of having members from both chambers?
Well, Delaware, this is one of the 4 committees in Delaware that is jointly run. And both bipartisan. So we have for the legislative oversight, we have 10 members, 5 from the House and 5 from the Senate. So I feel like it pulls in a lot of different viewpoints, and it's just making our state run stronger, more transparent. Again, we're super small, and the public really likes us to work together. They don't want to see the fighting over something, or I don't even know what word to give it, but it is really nice to have the different opinions to make an informed decision about a committee or a board that we have in our state.
Yeah.
So even though it's only one of the 4 committees that are jointly run, it would be nice if we had more committees that were jointly run.
Well, legislators are one of those few places where you get people of a whole lot of different backgrounds together to try to problem solve. So, Senator McBroom, last session, you were a co-sponsor of a resolution to establish a bicameral oversight committee of equal party membership. Could you say more about the proposed structure of this committee and what would have been their powers and duties if the resolution had become law? And do you plan on reintroducing these resolutions?
Yeah, I think that it's an idea that's just got a lot of merit from investigating around the country, and I received help, from the Levin Center in doing that. But looking at what other states such as Delaware, Carolinas, and others had in place, where they had some sort of joint committee, had a constitutional body, in some places that provides a lot more rigor and a lot more independence of the committee. And that's been one of the failures in Michigan over the years, and I think why the process fell into disuse is that the committee processes here were so controlled by a leadership position in either chamber, and then they dictated to the chairperson what they could look into and what they wouldn't look into. Our access to our subpoena powers in Michigan are very limited here, to only when it's approved by the speaker or the Senate Majority Leader. Despite the fact that statute really says we can use it anytime, you lose your chairmanship if you use it without their permission. So and we just have a very bad heritage, very bad tradition here. And so I've bucked that trend and have managed to ride out my leadership's opposition a few times and survive that fury. But, others might not. And so establishing a constitutionally protected body and building it, as I suggested, where it would be bipartisan and bicameral. There wouldn't be, and the chairmanships would rotate on a quarterly basis to a member of the other party. This is an idea that, I found to be a way that we could create a balance, because as Senator Hoffner suggested, the people want to see this particular issue of government accountability as a joint effort. And when you have too many situations where if Republicans have the levers in the legislature and they have the governor's office, it's like, well, we're just going to, solve all of our problems where it's not embarrassing to the governor. And we're going to protect the governor's administration by not airing out their dirty laundry. So we'll have a private meeting. And then 2 years later, there's new legislature, and they don't even know what that agreement was. Nobody talks about it. Nothing's written down, and nothing's been done. So the next audit comes out and you have the exact same problems all over again. And I just got sick of that. And I had to tell Republican governor's administration, it's like, I'm not going to go and have closed door meetings with you to discuss public business. And, Carolina was so refreshing when I heard they're not even allowed to do that. I mean, they're just flat out forbidden from that. And so my constitutional amendment is an attempt to create a structure that leaves a legacy and forces the legislature to work together and work better and make oversight a nonpartisan issue ultimately, as much as is possible. And I do plan to reintroduce that. I'm in the minority now, and Michigan's facing a referendum on our Constitution in its entirety in 26. So I'm not sure exactly what benefits there are at this point in amending the Constitution, but I'm certainly going to continue to try and wage that fight.
Well, I did notice when looking at the introduced resolution, you had a lot of bipartisan support. I mean, it was a lot of support across the board in support of trying to build a structure like this in the Constitution, which does kind of lead me into my next question. Oversight and fact-finding work best when committee members work together. How do you ensure bipartisanship in a committee? And do either of you have any experiences to share?
Well, I think encouraging bipartisan is good for all. And I'm very big on constitutional amendments, so I have to give props to Senator McBroom for going that route. It's difficult, but our constituents have a better representation when both parties can come together and increase quality of communications that both parties are working together. We all want what's best for our state and our communities. So we really need to come together for the best outcome, save our taxpayer dollars, enhance boards and commissions. So they're working for the public and not for self-interest. And I feel Senator McBroom's pain when there are legislators that are working for self-interest. And it's hard when you're in a state, we're very, Delaware is very heavily Democrat. We have 21 senators right now, 15 of them are Democrat, you know? So we're a little happy family right now. And even in our House side, you know, the Democrats outweigh the Republicans, and we have a Democratic governor. So we just, I think everyone, whether they're Democrat or Republican, they don't want any of the constituents to feel left out or ignored. If they have an issue with a particular agency, we should all take it seriously and work together to make sure that they're not being left out. And transparency is huge. We want everything we do is published on our website, even public comments. Anyone submitting public comment, we put that on the website so that the members of the community feel involved, like we are listening to them. And that I find that extremely important. And I think that we are all adult enough not to bring in our personal issues or our personal beliefs when we're serving the public.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McBroom.
I think in the oversight world, it is so important to build a tradition, a culture of trust between the two parties. And one does that by respecting their colleagues on the committee, by allowing discussion, no matter how frustrating it is, no matter how, you know, how much you feel like some other member who got appointed to the committee is trying to make some political hits or points. I think it's really important to allow them to have that space to make that point. I think that it's really critical to have processes in place that allow the oversight process. I guess I'm sorry to use the same word in two parts of the sentence, but it's really important to not just do oversight whenever it's sexy, right? It's important not to just chase after and say, oh, this is the governor of the other party and they've screwed up something, I'm going to chase after that. But then when it's the governor from your own party, say, oh, well, you know, we don't have to do it this time. And the moment you start doing that, you lose all credibility. And that's, I think, been paramount to the work I've tried to accomplish over my time is how do you maintain credibility? And, you know, when I'm investigating the election and people wanted to call me up and say, here's stuff, you got to call this guy or whatever. And it's like, well, if that guy works for the president, then I don't want to call him. I don't want to speak to him, because then next thing I know, they're going to go out and say, they spoke to the chairman of the committee, and I'm going to start losing credibility. It was really important for me to control how I went about receiving information and make sure that I was receiving it in a fair and just way that didn't create any sort of ability for my objectivity in the situation to be questioned by others. And that's part of why we use the Auditor General so much, and we take up every audit that has a material finding, no matter how important or how tense that would make the situation. And I had a lot of times where the previous governor would say, oh, could you please not bring that up? I mean, it's not that big a deal. And I would say, yeah, you're right, it's not a big deal, but we do every material finding. And that's why I also last term was very much into doing hearings on every gubernatorial appointment, no matter how boring they were, no matter how much everybody agreed with them, because if you set yourself up to always do that as a culture, as a tradition, then when a bad one comes along, it's not all of a sudden a partisan issue that you flagged. You say, we do this all the time. It has nothing to do with partisan politics.
Incorporating that sort of a routine oversight is, you're saying in the Levin Center.
Using routine, making something routine, I think, is a critical way of helping get around the allegations that this is just a partisan witch hunt, as we watch Congress do all the time, right?
So Senator McBroom, I'm going to ask kind of a little bit of follow-up. We brought up the Auditor General a couple of times, and with this being a national audience, the way the Auditor General set up in Michigan is a little different than a lot of other places. Do you mind just talking a little bit more about Michigan's Auditor General? And I know that the resolution last term also had a little bit of a conversation of just the way in which they would interact with that joint oversight committee. If you could just talk about that a little bit, that'd be great.
So our Auditor General's office transitioned with our current constitution from being an executive branch office to being a legislative branch office. And so the Auditor General works for us, is appointed by us. They have very broad constitutional authority to look into everything that is being done financially and almost everything that the government's doing internally as a matter of policy or practice. And so they do both financial and performance audits. There's times where the executive branch still fights them, and there's numerous court cases where they have pushed, to say, well, we don't have to show you these records from CPS because they're protected by privacy concerns. And yet the courts have always come back to side with the Auditor General and say they can't do their real job unless they actually have access to these documents, and they'll still have to keep them confidential, but they have to be able to look at them. They're very robust when it comes to those practices, and they've long been, recognized for their fidelity to numerous standards, CPA standards, other standards. I still think there's a lot that we can do to strengthen them, though, because while they're very able to come to us and say, this doesn't meet a certain specification, a certain practice, a certain best practice, generally accepted practice, whatever it is, they don't really have a focus on coming to us and saying, here's a law that was passed. Let's say it's to preserve wetlands. And 20 years have gone by and the law is not working. We haven't actually preserved any wetlands, and they don't do that. And that's something I'd really like to see them be able to come to us and say, here's a law that's supposed to be protecting children. Here, it's supposed to be saving the state money. This is why it got passed. It's not doing that. And they don't really have that skill set. Perhaps it's because there's just a department full of mostly accountants right now. But there needs to be a little bit more of a shift, I think, with the policy aspect. And that's something I've been trying to generate into this, and looking at some of the reforms that we've mentioned to make them do that more, such as I saw some of the other states do in their inspector general offices. So it's kind of, right now we don't really have that inspector general side, and maybe I need to get more of that into the Auditor General.
Thank you, Senator. And building off of structural reforms for oversight, and thinking about oversight just more broadly, what are you prioritizing for oversight as the Vice Chair of the Senate Oversight Committee and through your membership in other legislative committees?
Well, I continue to be very focused on the corrections issues. I've also really taken up a recent interest in contract issues. We saw through the last two administrations, and particularly with the COVID crisis, the executive branch really dramatically increased the use of contracting. And some of these contracts were given out very quickly. Some of them made national attention as being kind of scandalous for who they were written with, et cetera. And so we really need to do a much better job overseeing how contracts are entered into by the executive branch. And the Auditor General's office brought this to my attention, and we don't really have a very good procedure right now for auditing contracts on a quick basis. That's another kind of weakness of the Auditor General office, despite them being so good at what they do, is they're not very fast. And we need to find a way to be able to identify some of these things, especially the contracts, more quickly. We totally blew it with, the unemployment insurance agency during the COVID situation. We had over $9 billion lost or misspent. And some of it, they knew. I mean, we found the documents where the governor's office literally knew that we're probably going to actually misspend $3.5 billion, but we're going to do it and see what happens and hope the feds forgive us. These kind of things, because they got rid of all of the people in the department who watch out for fraud. And they hired an outside contractor to help expedite the issuing of checks. And that contractor hired people who had been previously convicted of fraud and identity theft. So, it's all great to come after the fact and say, here, this was really screwed up. Don't do this again. But what could we have done to be more aggressive on making sure these kind of contracts didn't get signed up for in the first place? So those are a couple of the passionate things I'm working on. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we've got term limits here, very short term limits. So I'm now a short termer on my way out, and I'm desperate to set up whatever processes, whatever protections I can in the Constitution to make sure that oversight continues to grow more robust in Michigan, and that we have more transparency and integrity in the process than we did when I got here.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hoffner, I want to kind of ask you the same question. What are you prioritizing for oversight with your chair and also any other membership and other legislative committees?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, I was just asking, what do you prioritize with your service as chair and also in other legislative committees with the context of oversight?
So what we talked about before the year starts, we pick 6 or 7 entities, but we leave a little room for something that comes up. And there is, right now, we are having a lead water problem. We found that all our public schools have lead in the water. And it falls under the Delaware Health and Social Services, but we don't have to take on the entire Delaware Health and Social Services. We could take on a small portion that covers the area that was supposed to be watching for contaminants in our water. Delaware does have a lot of issues with that water, but the lead problem is definitely something that we're seeing on not only in this committee, but in the Education Committee, the Health and Social Services Committee. So we're all trying to attack it in different ways to find out, how did we get to this problem and how are we going to fix it quickly before our children get harmed? So this was one topic that came to us in January when we started back in session, and it was a unanimous vote that we're looking into this right now. This is something that needs to be fast tracked. Obviously, being from Michigan, Senator Broom, lead in the water, it's untreatable, uncurable. Our children, they're our biggest asset in our state. So we definitely want to make sure we're protecting them. And you need clean water for good health, good mental and physical health. So this is something that I think not just my committee in oversight, but other committees in our state legislature is looking into.
Thank you, Senator. Going back to Senator McBroom here, you are the Senate Republicans caucus dean. What might you say to the, what might you say to the newer state senators, both in Michigan and across the country, to help encourage them to view state oversight as an essential aspect of being an effective legislator?
Well, I just laughed when you brought up me being the dean, because it's not something that shows up in many places. I put it on my cards because I'm proud to be that.
Absolutely.
The dean position here used to be one granted to the guy with the most seniority, kind of an honorary thing. And then, of course, when term limits came in here, kind of a moot point. So it's basically appointed now as the person who serves as kind of the spiritual counselor or chaplain, if you will, because we don't have an official chaplain. And so, I do prayers at the beginning of our caucus meetings. And if the session person who's supposed to do the prayer doesn't show up, I'm always the go-to guy for the clerk. And so I try very hard to serve in that role, to be somebody with their finger on the pulse of everyone's personal, what's going on in your life, and can I pray for you? Do you need help? Can the caucus help you? So I'm proud to be that. Does it play in my role of oversight? Maybe only from the extent that I think the reason why I was granted the position of dean is very much the same reason why people have trusted me with the oversight, and why I've managed to get away with rankling my own leadership at times with my pushiness. Whether I was the guy who insisted we have to investigate the Flint water crisis, and my leadership kept saying, don't do it, you're going to embarrass our governor. And I was like, it doesn't matter. I mean, I don't even think it's our governor's fault, but we have to look into it and see where the chips fall. And I think that, and I've told you before, Ben, that why did I get the passion for this? It's because at first I just wanted to get to Lansing and go after one department who was screwing up buying land and how they were managing deer or how they were handling agriculture. And I get on the policy committee and thought, this is where I can make a difference. And in the end, I couldn't make a difference because all the other members on that committee also had their own little pet thing that they wanted to get through agriculture, and they wanted to get through natural resources. And when I brought up an issue of where the department was doing it wrong, nobody wanted to rock that boat too hard because they wanted the department to like what they were working on. And I struggled with that for 3 years before I finally realized I was doing it the wrong way. I needed to get on oversight, where you're supposed to be antagonistic to the departments. You're not there to make their lives better. You're not there to massage policy. You're there to look into why it's not working. And it also gave me the great ability to go with any department. Then I didn't have to just restrict myself to that particular area. And so became passionate about that because government needs to work better for people, and problems. Republicans tend to think, we can fix this problem by, more accountability and more testing and stuff. And Democrats, no offense, anybody, these are just big generalizations. Democrats, well, if we spent more money, that would fix this problem. Those problems would be fixed because you're underfunding it. And I'm more like, well, if we pull this all apart and find out this one law here, this one line in a law is making this not work so well. If we just tweak this, if we just change the way we appoint people to this commission, if we just change the nominating process, if we just make sure people are better represented or get their voices heard. If in Flint water, if we had made sure that when the public came with their dirty jugs of water, somebody actually had to listen to them and couldn't just blow them off, that could have saved us a year of agony just for those people, not to mention the years of agony afterwards for the state government. And so that's driven my passion. And if that parallels my dean's work, that's good.
That's great. And so, Senator, we have a question in here from Q&A that links right into what we were just talking about. Senator McBroom, what was the biggest oversight lesson you learned from the Flint water crisis that could help Senator Hoffner with her investigation?
Watch out for people covering their own butts. It was interesting. When we first started looking into it, we had so many people. I made sure that one of the guys I appointed to our special investigation was a doctor, because when we started having the folks come in and talk to us about what they were experiencing, it was heartbreaking. It was just heartbreaking. But fortunately, this doctor on the committee took me aside. And he's like, look, I know these stories are breaking your heart and you want to help these people, but you also have to be clear that some of these people had long-term problems beforehand that nobody could address. And now they're blaming this. Now they have something that they're blaming. But he's like, but their problems preceded that. And so it was important to have the right people. Having that doctor on there made a huge world of difference to helping actually drill down to what really happened. We went to Flint. We met with the health department. We saw how they screwed it up. We met with the hospitals. We see how they did it wrong. We met with the state government and saw how they had done things wrong. And in the midst of that crisis, so many people made so many wrong decisions on a little basis, but then all the problems together summed up into this monumental disaster. And it was important to separate out those who were willfully negligent versus those who just didn't anticipate that what little decision they were making at that time was how that was. They didn't know the other thing was going wrong too. And so then you know, there was a lot of pieces to that puzzle that are a real mess. So I don't know if I'm helping you much, Senator. I know that, you know, I thought the best motivation was we've got to get to the truth, whatever it is, and who's ever is in trouble. But we don't have to chase after this as if somebody needs to be beheaded because of it either. Good people make legitimate mistakes. One of our biggest was we had a lot of people who cried wolf for a long time, and then the government started ignoring them. And then when they had a real story, they didn't pay attention when they should have. And that was sad. It was just very sad.
I'm hoping we don't get to that point.
Yeah.
But your advice is good about getting other departments involved, not just looking at Delaware Health and Social Services. Like the schools didn't even know it was happening. A lot of it's happening underground, but DelDOT could tell us what kind of pipes they used, what kind of, you know, fittings when it makes the turn, because I think that turn is lead and it might be corroding over the years. I did have one town tell me, and I know this is off topic, but one town told me, well, it's going to cost $12 million to replace all the pipes. So we're just not going to do it. And I was like, no, well, you then have to close the school. You can't just, you know, let the kids come. So their fix around right now is having kids bring bottled water. But that's not a fix. That's a Band-Aid until we fix the problem.
So we have Levin Center describe this sorts of oversight as being event-driven oversight in response to something happening. There's been breaking news, something maybe an audit report gave a recommendation. You go, whoa, we have to really find out what's going on. Whereas you have more of your sort of routine oversight, which we also talked about a little bit earlier, and ways to be able to create routine oversight mechanisms and how to prioritize that within your own legislature. Which leads me to another question that was submitted. Is your legislature exercising oversight of the new infrastructure money provided by the federal government? And if so, how?
We are not.
Not.
Now, our Delaware auditor, we have a new auditor this year. She started in January. She's amazing. We're hoping that her first report definitely comes out and shows us our last auditor was not doing anything. Like pretty much, you might have seen it in the news. She got indicted, you know. So we needed a new auditor. We don't have an inspector general. And this is, you know, going back to why did you run? You know, there are so many holes and so little oversight over certain things. And a few other legislators that were elected this year with me, you know, when we were in orientation, one of them said they should have gave me the money. I knew how to spend it, you know, like. So this is something that, yes, it has to expand. We have to find out where all this money is going. We created years ago when I was a lobbyist, a bill was created for $200 million for clean water. Don't know where that money is. I know they spent about 50,000 of it. Don't know where the rest is, you know? So, yep, that is something that needs to be looked into. I know they like to move money around and say they're going to put it back, but who? Where are you moving it to? Why? You know, these are all these questions that we have to ask. And our lead problem in our water was actually found by an advocate. She just pulled a report from Delaware Health and Social Services and saw the lead levels were too high in the water. You know, so we have to do a better job at looking at these things, but we do rely on our commissions and our agencies, that even our volunteer-based ones, to bring things to us. We're not going to know what everything is going on. And, you know, it does come when you're not in office, it's easier to say this than when you are in office, but follow the money. You're going to follow the money and you're going to find the problems. You know?
Senator McBroom, the new infrastructure money and being provided by the federal government, how is Michigan planning to try to monitor this spending?
Well, it's a very good question, Ben. And, I know that our Auditor General, of course, will, do performance audits and financial audits on this after the fact. But ahead of time, it's up to the legislature. And this is something that I had initially started on last year, but I'm now in the minority. And so I really do not know precisely what the plans will be. We're under one-party control right now throughout the legislature and the governor's office and even to the courts. And so, this is moments where I, regret not having been able to advance putting, kind of these big plans of creating procedures that were structured to work regardless of what party was in control in place, and wasn't able to get done. And one of the things I'll say to that, to your point about kind of crisis initiated versus, standard practice, is that I discovered over the years that so many of my big plans kept on being waylaid for time by the crisis of the moment. And it's a hard reality to deal with in this job, especially when we're term limited like we are here in Michigan, that the big projects that I wanted to get done always seem to be taking a back seat to, the next crisis that came up that I got asked to look into. And it's kind of a regret in that sense for me. And so I don't know how we're going to, other than the Auditor General at this point, if we are at all.
Thank you. Going into another question here, and it'll just be interesting to see the answers. Have the two of you faced a contentious oversight topic or hearing? How did you work through the differences in the pursuit of facts?
For me, it's the board that we're deciding if we should, we are going to sunset them. We did have one committee member that felt that we were being wildly inappropriate, with his words, for even having the discussion about sunsetting them. And he didn't even know that it was a board until we had the committee hearing, and some of his constituents were texting him saying, "Oh, I might be interested in joining that board." And I'm like, well, they had 12 years to decide to join the board and they did not, So it was, we had the meeting with the entity. I still don't really know what they did. We had a second meeting to make recommendations on what we can do. He kind of was freaked out a little bit, We talked to him. So as the chair, I sent out an email letting them know on April 6th, this is it, we're voting, and he doesn't have to vote if he doesn't want to, but this is it. We cannot keep dragging this out. The other part of it was, this board was created by a legislator for his wife 12 years ago. So it was like, okay, so the legislator made a hobby for his wife. His wife didn't follow through on the hobby. It's time to do something about it. And we all have like a little bit of a personal connection with this legislator, even though he's retired now. But we all have a little bit of a personal connection. But honestly, as an elected official, you have to put those personal connections aside and do what's best for your community. And if some of the committee members don't believe that, then, we're just going to vote anyway and see where the chips fall.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McBroom.
Well, I've certainly had some contentious ones with departments, corrections in particular, where I was investigating. I think our current director is not up to the job and has let us down for her tenure. She's been there a long time, so 6 years now, I believe, and continues to blame problems. And it's like, look, I know those exist, but they're your problems and you're tasked with solving them. And if you can't, then we need somebody else. But she's survived 2 administrations at this point, 2 different parties even. And so we've certainly had contentious ones in those regards. But nothing compares to, the drama that surrounded my investigation into the 2020 election. and protesters outside beating on the windows, members of my committee who thought I was trying to steal the election for one particular candidate, people who didn't think I was doing enough, people who thought I was doing too much, death threats. It was wild. And it was gratifying that when our report finally came out, and we issued a report in June of 21, that my Democratic colleague who served on the committee with me came and said, I'm very proud of the work that you did. I'm sorry that I kind of gave you a hard time at the beginning. Now, of course, he said that because of the results, right? But he's like, I always knew you could do it. I just didn't think that, it was worth the hassle of getting there. And he's like, I'm still not sure it is. But we worked hard. I mean, I brought anybody in who wanted to testify, and I took a lot of flack for that. Anybody who had firsthand knowledge, because I didn't want everybody in the world coming in. But it was tough. And I mean, I had to, ask somebody to go out and get the people to stop beating on the windows, because otherwise it's like, well, we'll just adjourn the hearing. Can't risk the lives of my committee and everything by having people bust down and fall in the windows. So, I've been through some tense, scary moments, but I believe it was worth it. And I think our work product and the way we handled ourselves demonstrated that it was worth it.
Thank you. And this is kind of a little bit of a follow-up. It's in the same neighborhood as this question. It's a question from the audience. Oversight can be time-consuming. Do you feel members of your committees are generally well-prepared for oversight meetings?
Well, I'll say that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Senator. I'll say that, one, I don't have nearly enough staff, and I don't have nearly enough members. Any of the times I've chaired the committee, I've had very small committees and almost no staff. And I've had no staff that was specifically dedicated to just the oversight issues. They have other things, and we cannot get nearly enough done. I'm very jealous of what I learned from the chairman down in Carolina, who, he's got at least 3 or 5 full-time staff working on it. He's got a committee of 20-some people. So all I can really say is that I at least have been fortunate and blessed with the members who got appointed to the committee. At least 3/4 of them are also very interested in it from both sides of the aisle, and they do a lot of the work. They read a lot of the boring audits, and they come very prepared. And I would add that I think that's another thing that is really important, is that as a chairman, I worked really hard to prepare for each meeting by previewing with the auditor or the department oftentimes what we were going to discuss and what questions they should expect and what questions I expected them to be ready to answer, so that we didn't just have a hearing that was set up to make gotchas and drama like they do in Washington. We want real answers, and we want to be able to do follow-ups and not have a whole bunch of, well, I'll get back to you about that later. That's just pointless. And I instruct my members, we're not here to score political points for you and your Facebook post. We're here to get to real answers. And that takes prep work from the chairman and from the members.
Thank you. Senator Hoffner?
Yeah, I feel like almost all of the 10 committee members are prepared when we walk in. Every meeting, because our session only runs from January to June, our meetings are close together. We're having 2 or 3 in a week. And our analysts, I have them on speed dial on my text. We talk about everything before coming up to a meeting, after the meeting. So I do think for the public, the committee should be prepared. You should know who's coming in, what you're going to talk to them about, because we do live stream everything. And if we're stumbling around, the public's not going to have faith in us in what we're doing. So it is nice that I could say maybe once or twice some of the members came in and they were a little clueless, but we are back to back on meetings. Like we want to run out of the legislative committee meeting and we'll be in something else. We might be in corrections committee hearing or health or education. So there is a lot of back to back right now. I do wish our legislative session was throughout the year. I'm sure the other members of the General Assembly would shoot me for saying that, you know. But I'm green. I'm very into it. I'm very, very into it.
That leads me into another question from the audience. This one's for Senator Hoffner. So from Professor Marjorie Thompson, I'd like to know whether there's any plan in the state of Delaware to fund more support staff for the Joint Committee on Oversight. Do you think that the state's citizens would support some sort of small tax to support the work of the Oversight Committee and the Auditor's Office?
Well, Delaware has extremely low taxes, extremely low. Like we're doing a reassessment right now because we haven't raised taxes since like 1980. On a $500,000 house, you're probably paying like $1,800 a year. So the public does not want to see any taxes raised. We do have 2 analysts, full-time analysts, and 1 part-time. And I would like to see them have a little bit of extra help. You know, I would like to push, even if we took the money out of just general funds or allocated it from somewhere else. We have a lot of aides that are in the building. Some I don't know what they do. Some are working double time. Yeah, I'm Senator McBroom. I'm sure you know that there's some aides that just work 900 miles an hour all the time. So I would like to see if we could have more help for our analysts in legislative oversight.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump to a question here that I really want to make sure we cover because we've kind of nudged towards this a few times talking about single party leadership. I want to ask about when you serve in a state with single party leadership in Michigan, in Delaware, and across the country. There are states of all sizes where the majority party in the legislature also controls the governor's office. It's often stated that there's a tendency to do less oversight with single party leadership, but evidence is conflicting, and it slightly depends on the type of oversight being conducted. Is just some of the initial things that we've been able to see. I'd like to just have that as an open question. What do the two of you think about that when conducting oversight with a single party leadership versus divided government?
I think it has a lot to do with the culture and traditions that you have in the state. It has a lot to do with the strength of your leadership. And I think, at least in Michigan, I sense here what I perceive, and I have to admit, I mean, I don't want to be too hard on our Washington colleagues because I'm not there, but there's this perception that ultimately they're there for the sound bites and for the back patting and all of that other stuff, and not necessarily always focused on what's best for the people. And so we get all of this tension here. We just have a bad culture that says, well, we don't want to embarrass our guy. And if you look historically at America, you look historically at each state, and you look historically at Washington, there were always partisan politics, except in the era of good feelings, we'll forget about that. But otherwise, there's always been this, but there was also a unity of the legislative branch versus the executive branch. And so no matter which party was in charge of the legislature, that was our body. And we were defending it against the executive. And we've morphed in Michigan, and I think at the federal level too, it's morphed into we defend party before we defend branch. And I can't say that for other states. I sense that's not true as much in other states as that is here in Michigan, at least. But it's very frustrating. We saw it during COVID. I saw it preceding COVID when Republicans held all 3 levers. And it's wrong. The legislature needs to be in a mode of defending its authority and its power against the executive. Somewhat antagonistic at times. It needs to be that way. And both parties should be trying to defend the sanctity of the legislature, because I'm not a believer in the idea that we have 3 co-equal branches of government. And if you study the early documents of this country, the legislative branch is supposed to be the preeminent and predominant branch of the 3 branches. And there's checks and balances, but this is where the people meet. This is where the people's voice is heard. This is where the laws are written. And it should be the dominant branch of power. And we're losing that here in Michigan. and it's this defend party versus defend our branch of government.
Well,
I'm gonna
yeah.
have to agree. I feel like Delaware was more defending party before, and now we're starting to slowly move away from that. And it's gonna take more elections and more turnover before we fully get there. But there was times, and because I was a lobbyist before I became elected, I saw it. I would go up to people and I would lobby for an issue, and they'd be like, "Oh, our governor doesn't want that, so I'm not going to do it." And I'm like, "But your community wants it," So I do notice that we are starting to have bigger turnover on people are stepping up to run. People who thought they would never run for office are now stepping up to run, and they're winning because people want change. They want to feel like the person who's representing them is really representing them and not just their party. I'm really lucky to come from a small state where we cross party lines all the time. We're friends, we're neighbors,
Mhm.
And when you are running from office in a small state, the bad mouthing of another party or a person doesn't fly with the public. So as soon as you put out that bad tactic, that person automatically loses, because even their own party does not want to see that. We're neighbors. We know where we all live. New York, Michigan, they're giant states. You might never see somebody again.
For sure.
Yeah. When people come to Delaware, I always tell them, listen, don't flip anybody off. You're going to see them again. We are under 1 million people. You are going to know everyone in the state.
Well, that kind of leads into a question from the audience, because I'm thinking about, just oversight and what gets prioritized during, divided government or during one party leadership. There's a question here from Professor Marjorie Townsend. If Senator McBroom is not able to succeed in passing the bill to create this bipartisan joint chamber oversight committee, does he envision using a ballot initiative to put that proposal into Michigan's constitution?
Well, actually, it's interesting you should bring that up. I have been also, kind of parallel working on this issue, and Ben knows this, working on creating a process for legislative open records and applying the FOIA Act. Most of you are probably familiar with FOIA to our governor's office. We're one of 2 states that doesn't apply it to the governor. And, while many states have tried to attempt FOIA on the legislature, they're kind of hit or miss as to enforceability. And so I've been trying to create a legislatively successful act that's, controlled within the legislature, but polices it. So it's been a difficult concept. Well, anyway, I'm working with one of my colleagues right now, and suddenly this governor is not so warm and fuzzy about having FOIA applied to her after she voted for it when it was a different governor. So we're struggling right now, and he's a Democrat, and I'm a Republican, and we both have said, maybe our strategy is to get this on the ballot for the people, and just, let's get the legislature to pass it, and then have the people vote on it instead. Whether we do it as a citizens initiative or as a constitutional amendment, we're still exploring what's the best way to get that done. The oversight issue is there as well. However, as I mentioned earlier on the call, Michigan's already facing a complete constitutional convention question in 2026. And so if I don't get it done successfully, or we don't get it on the ballot, I'm going to continue to litigate that through the constitutional process that I suspect we are probably going to start in 2027. The stars are aligning for Michigan to have a con. I don't necessarily think that's a good idea, but traditionally that's been championed by the more liberal side of the spectrum. But in recent months, as some of you might not be surprised to hear, suddenly there's folks on the right side of the spectrum now who are also championing that and saying that we need to do it. They've created a new fiction that the Republican chair of the convention back in 1961 and 62 was actually a liberal plant who was secretly drafting a constitution to disenfranchise people and create communism. So, I mean, there's a whole narrative going on right now. And so I kind of think that it might happen.
Thank you. I think that will lead me into my next question here. We've talked a little bit about term limits so far on the call, but haven't had a chance to really do a dive on this. Michigan now has a cumulative 12-year term limit for the state legislature. Delaware does not have term limits at all. Evidence suggests term-limited legislatures tend to be less inclined to do in-depth state legislative oversight. Do you believe term limits affect state legislative oversight?
It shouldn't. But
Absolutely.
it just shouldn't. But possibly because we don't have term limits.
So,
I don't know.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Senator, if you don't mind. I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
it absolutely affects it for a couple of critical reasons. One, I mean, the turnover is so fast that building relationships and knowing what you're doing. It took me 3 years to figure out that oversight was where I really wanted to be and what I had a passion for. So you've got that problem. But more than anything, at least here in Michigan, the way this works out is that as you're assigned committees, your leadership primarily assigns you committees based on how you need to generate money for the next campaign. And so they put you into the money committees, energy, technology, communications committees, and things like that. And they direct their membership. Everybody needs to have a money committee because, you know, farmers don't give much money, and teachers, education's not a money committee. And oversight became who's going to give money to oversight? I mean, who cares who the chairman of oversight is? You know, you don't put that on your card and say, come to my fundraiser, I'm the chairman of oversight. And so you lose the experienced members and you put in a few members who've got some bee in their bonnet about some particular issue, and they might go out tilting after that windmill or the other one, and they forget about what oversight is all about. And that's exactly what took place here in Michigan. It's why the Senate didn't even have an oversight committee anymore after a while. And it's primarily term limits were the death knell for oversight in this state for a long time. And it's me and a couple of others who just came in there and said, we're going to get this going again. And I had to go back and interview people who had chaired it in the 80s and 90s to figure out where things were at. So short term limits anyway. Perhaps not long ones. I mean, I'd be supportive if we had 20-year term limits or something, but the very short ones we had, just terrible for term limits. And even now doing 12 years for the House is going to really help the House, but it's not going to be good for the Senate. And so, I don't recommend them. I don't recommend them.
We do have a couple of committee members on our oversight committee that never been the chair, but they've been on it for years. They just love being on it.
Yes. And they've seen this department in before, and they're like, I remember what you said last time you were here.
Yep.
That's me now. I'm the long in the tooth guy, and I'm on the way out the door. So
yeah, speaking about the door, that is one thing that I would also say about term limits. It was heartbreaking seeing a lot of good people being shown the door after, especially in the House. And in 6 years, I mean, nobody that I worked for back in the Michigan legislature is still there. They're all gone.
What other career in this world do you think somebody's in their best year in their first 2 years and that they aren't better at their job at year 5? I mean, it's just senseless. And we could do a lot of other things about controlling who gets appropriate chairs and things like that, and how old people are even. Maybe we should have some age limit issues. But you know, term limits have not solved Michigan's problems. They haven't made us better. In fact, I think they've made us far more dysfunctional and have been a huge problem for us.
Just too many new people at once coming in.
A third to 2/3 new every 2 years.
Yeah, that's too many. That's
a speaker whose experience is a maximum of 4 years and oftentimes only 2 years. And our House of Representatives would it shames itself, and I'd be embarrassed to have many of you come and watch what I just witnessed last week, where they wouldn't call on a member who had his hand up. And I mean, it's And I mean, it wasn't even a controversial vote. It was a unanimous vote, and they wouldn't let him speak. And it's happens so often. And I've been to many of your other capitals and met people. And does that ever happen here? Only in weird circumstances, right? You know, if that guy's been up and he's saying something inappropriate time and time again, maybe, but not in normal circumstances. And I had a group of high school kids there, and I'm trying to explain to them what's happening. They're like, why is that guy down there raising his hand and no one's calling on him? You know, it's a travesty.
Yeah.
Don't do term limits.
Okay. Okay.
One thing that everyone should do, though, is check out the State Legislature Oversight Wiki on the Levin Center's website. So we just recently launched a wiki looking at the structures of legislative oversight all across the country. I believe there's already a link to it in a chat, and you can look at it, scroll through. It's all the different offices, different entities, different committees, and the way that they conduct oversight in every state and various territories that have seats in the U.S. Congress. And please take a look for yourself. But one of the questions that I wanted to bring up, the reason why I needed to bring a little more context to the Legislative Oversight Wiki, is that and also Senator McBroom, term limit information will be added soon. That is currently in process. So the question I have is the Levin Center Wiki page shows that states have very different systems for showing the public how money is spent, how public money is spent. Do you think the legislature should spend time on setting up a system to track state dollars better?
Yes. Yes. So we're so about transparency, but it seems like they put so much stuff out there and then don't put the important things that somebody might be looking for, like the money, you know? So yes, I think that we could all do a better job on transparency on how the money's being spent, why some money's going into the general fund, why some money goes into the governor's rainy day fund that we don't even really know about, you know? So we could do a better job on how much money we do have. And not to defend my governor because he's a Democrat, but when he got into office, a lot of people didn't know that we were 300 million in debt. And during his term, he was able to gain that money back plus another 300. Well, show how we did that. We need the public to know how we did that, why we did that, why we tightened up on some things. Our state treasurer is doing a phenomenal job on moving funds around and gaining us interest. So we are gaining more money on that avenue. But we need to do a better job in showing the public where the money's coming from and where it's being spent.
Thank you.
I think more transparency is always desirable. I think we should do what we can for it. But I mean, I've seen Treasury say it needs $800,000 to set up a computer program to write 4 checks a year. And, you know, and I told them, I mean, they could give me $100 and I'd hand deliver them. So they just need someone to sign them, you know, so we can create more systems, but what's it going to cost? And what is the public really going to get out of it? And what are they going to understand? I mean, I've been trying to explain Michigan's goofy sales tax on fuel and how that affects schools and doesn't, you know, for 12 years now. And I really haven't made a dent in the problem. And so, yeah, more transparency is great, but I'm right now more concerned about getting transparency on bigger policy tickets. And I think we do disclose a lot of how we spend money. And I don't think it's going to get more clear to people as we give them more data either. So.
Thank you. And as we wrap up, I have one final question that was asked really earlier. If you could choose one state you'd like to spend some time in, hypothetically, to learn about the state's oversight structures, what would it be?
Well, I think before the call even started, I said I would like to spend time in Michigan because of your independent redistricting commission.
Oh, yeah.
So, I would like to know how you pulled that off. How come every other state that tried it looked great on paper and then was a disaster in real life, but Michigan seemed to pull it off?
Well, and I'd love to have a whole hour to talk to you about it, because I love the idea, and we actually had one in our Constitution from 1963 that was inactivated because of a little snafu, and we should have fixed that years ago. And now we had the citizens come in with this one, which once again, I support the concept, but the execution of this one is clearly not entirely unbiased either. And so that's a frustration I have. And the way the districts are done are extremely user unfriendly for both the citizens and for the members serving. My district, I mean, just the way the lines are supposedly more fair, and I'm not here to argue one way or the other about that, but like I said, I need a whole hour to describe it. But, you know, Detroit went from having the ability to be community focused, which the law said it's supposed to be, keeping communities of interest intact, but now it's drawn up like pie wedges. And up in my area, the city that's only 10 miles from me is no longer a part of my district because we're in the same county, but now they've been carved out and sent up with a city that's 140 miles away. Meanwhile, a city that's up by that city is now carved in with my city. And it's like, how is this a community of interest? I mean, and then that makes it tougher for those of us serving. So it's a great idea. We should have an independent citizens redistricting commission. I like commissions. I'm supporting them all the time, but be careful what you ask for and how it's structured. So I'd love to help you. You're welcome to call me. We can visit on it. I've got a lot of ways it could have been done better and still gotten to the core idea of getting it out of the legislature's hands.
Right. Well, that's my goal, is to get it out of the legislature.
Yeah. Yep.
And we're now, last year, I had a bunch of college students, gave them a stipend. I was like, okay, research it. And redistricting was going on at that time. So there was a lot of information out there. And now this year I have a new group of students and I'm making them research it, because honestly, we're not going to do it again until 2030. It's going to affect them more than it's affecting us. Yeah. So we want fair maps, but I don't want that. I don't want
No, they're crazy. That's crazy. Where the lines are drawn now is just crazy too. I mean, the districts don't look better than they used to. And that was part of the key way they advertised getting people to vote for this. They're like, here's a crazy district. That can't be right. The new districts are even crazier when you draw the lines, but supposedly they're more fair. So anyway, as far as me, when I look at states, and I'm flattered, Senator, by your calling out Michigan, but I'm just so impressed with South Carolina. I would love to spend more time meeting with their chairman, going down there, watching them work, figuring out how I can imitate some of that process here in Michigan. I know 5 states fairly well how they're doing it, and out of those 5 anyway, I was most impressed with South Carolina.
And that's a real hope for the State Oversight Academy, is for a chance for elected officials, people studying elected legislatures across the country, the media, being able to help to work together to be able to enhance legislative oversight, both in our home states and all across the country. So that's, really what helped bring us all together. And I appreciate you both being part of our initial launch panel here. And well, thank you to everybody for what I hope was an enjoyable conversation on state legislative oversight. I hope you can also join us March 30th, this Thursday at 2 p.m. for the next panel as a part of our State Oversight Academy launch. The Eyes of the People, How State House Journalism Affects Legislative Behavior. And please follow the Levin Center on social media and subscribe to our newsletters for more engaging content on state legislative oversight. And for more information on the State Oversight Academy, please visit stateoversight.org. And thank you both again for just a wonderful conversation this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. And
thanks. Very nice to meet you, Senator.
You too.
Bye.
Stay warm.
Thanks.